Hello everyone, just making these videos to help you through the creation of your game prototype for your project. I'll do it in sort of episodes where we'll just cover like different bits and pieces. I'll do the core stuff first and then I'll make some additional videos for some of your stretch goals that you might have for your games. So in the project browser, we're going to go Games, Blank Project, Blueprint, Desktop, Maximum Quality, no starter content, no ray tracing, suitable location for your project file. Name yours after your game. I'm just going to call mine platformer_01 and then we'll press create. So yeah, we'll go through the initial content that you're going to need first. So probably, I don't know, a handful of videos, 5, 6, maybe less. And then we'll do some extra stuff later. So I'm just going to move this over here so you can see. Right, first things first, if your content browser isn't locked to your screen like that, you can just go into the content drawer and then you can dock it in the layout if you wish. Okay, we're going to make some folders to save our content, so we're just going to right click in a bit of empty space, go new folder. Let's call this first one levels, and then we'll make one more for now, new folder, blueprints. Let's make a new level, so we go file, new level, let's choose basic, press create, and then we'll save it right away by pressing the save icon in the top left hand corner, double click into the levels folder, and for the time being this is just going to be our test level, so that's what I'm going to call it, and then press save. If we go into the folder you can see there's our level and the build data there. Right, into the blueprints folder and we will make our initial 3 blueprints. So we'll right click, go blueprint class. First thing we're going to need is a game mode. The game mode, as you can see here, defines the game being played, its rules, scoring, and other facets of the game type. So we'll create ourselves a game mode and we'll call it BP_game mode. And then we'll right click again, blueprint class. This time we need a player controller. There it is. The player controller is an actor responsible for controlling a pawn used by the player. So let's create a player controller, BP_player controller, and then one more, we're going to need a character, so right click, blueprint class again. Don't use this character. This character comes with a skeletal mesh, which is a component for a 3D rigged character. We don't need that. So let's go into all classes and we're going to search for paper. This is for paper 2D, which is Unreal's 2D components. And we're going to find a paper character. The paper character comes with a sprite component instead, which is exactly what we need. And we'll call this BP_player character. Let's just do a file and save all. Right, let's go into the game mode. So we'll double click to open that up. I'm just going to dock this at the top. If yours doesn't open like this, you should have a little bit of blue text at the top saying open in full blueprint editor. Just click that and you'll come into this view. We're going to use the game mode to initially set our default controller class and our default pawn class as the controller and the character that we just made. So where it says player controller class, just click there and choose our BP player controller that we made, and default pawn class, hit the drop down and we'll select our BP player character that we just made. We can compile and save that. We need to apply our game mode in the project settings. If you don't see your project settings like this, just go edit, project settings, and then we're looking for maps and modes, and we're going to change the default game mode to the BP game mode that we just made. So our project is now using our game mode, which means it knows to load in our controller and our character by default. While we're here, we can change the editor startup map to test level. So every time we open up our project, it'll load into this level. We can change that at any time. You can change the default game map, but that really only matters when you launch the game either through the execution or you simulate the execution through the editor. Put it in if you want, doesn't really make a big deal. Alright, back to our test level, and we shall, if we press play now, by the way, I always hit this little drop down and change it to new editor window. We should now not be able to move around because our game mode is spawning in our character and controller, and because we haven't got any inputs or anything set up, we can't move. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to rotate the camera around so that the X is running from left to right. That's where all of our gameplay is going to take place, from left to right on the X axis. And I'm going to grab a player start. If you can't see the place actors tab, just go into window, click on place actors. You can come into basic, or you can just search for it here, but we're looking for a player start, so we're going to drag that in. And over on the right on the details tab, we're going to just change its location to 0 on the X and 0 on the Y, and we'll leave the Z alone. And that just makes sure it's in the center of the map. If we need to put objects on the same position on the on the Y axis rather as our character, we know just to set it to 0. Makes it nice and easy to figure things out. Right, next thing, let's go into our character, and we'll have a quick look at that. So you can see it comes with some basic components: capsule component for collision, arrow component to indicate which way is forward, a sprite component, which is where all of our animations will go, and then the character movement component to control how our character moves around. And then you've got the root component there, which is called self, which there's a few settings on there that we may or may not get into, but we'll check that out. Maybe some jump stuff over there. We'll probably have a look at that at some point. Right, so really the first thing I'm going to need is some visual representation of the character. For this, I am going to just make like a temporary sprite. You can just add a cube if you like, but I'm going to add a sprite, so I'm just going to open up Photoshop. I'll go File, New, and for my character I'm going to set it as 64 pixels. You can change this here, pixels, 64 pixels by 64 pixels. Press Create. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm just going to fill this in red, and then I'm going to get the pencil tool, and I'm just going to draw a very crude arrow just to indicate which way forward is for my character. It's really up to you whether you do this or not. That does look awful, but it's only temporary, so I'm not too concerned about that. I'm going to go File, Export, Export As. When you're exporting things, images for sprites, you're going to want to change your resampling from bicubic automatic to nearest neighbor just to retain all of those pixels. The format you want is a PNG, so we'll export that. I'm just going to send it into this folder here called tutorial files, and I'm going to export it as a placeholder player sprite, maybe that'll do. And yeah, I'll just export that out for the time being. I'm going to go back to the test level here. I might as well make a new folder now, so I'll go into the content, right click, new folder. We'll call this art, and then I'll import that. You can just drag and drop if you like. Drag that in there. I'm going to right click on this texture. The first thing you need to do when you're working in Paper 2D is go to Sprite Actions and then apply the Paper 2D texture settings, and that'll make it that'll set a lot of the settings inside of the texture so it's suitable for use with Paper 2D. And then I'm going to right click again, Sprite Actions, and I'm going to for this one I'm just going to create a sprite because it's just a square, and that then turns it into a sprite. So as it was previously a texture, it is now a sprite. And if we look at the player character, this sprite component needs a flipbook. We can't just put a sprite in there. I could just drag the sprite in as a separate component, but just for the time being, I'm going to turn it into a flipbook. It's nice and easy. Just right click, create flipbook, and we've now got this flipbook with a single frame of animations, currently running at 15 frames per second, but I don't really mind because we're going to get rid of that eventually anyway. With that done, I can select the sprite component and then hit the little drop down. There's my flipbook. I'm going to put that in. It looks like a decent enough size, so I'm just going to grab the capsule component, shrink it down. That's almost perfect. We'll compile and save that. The next thing we need is a spring arm and a camera. So we're going to go to Add Component, search for a spring arm. Just click away. There you can see our spring arm is in the scene. We want our camera to be attached to our spring arm, so a nice and easy way to do that is just select the spring arm and then add a camera, and because we had the spring arm selected, it's attached our camera to the end of the spring arm. We need to rotate it round so that it faces the side of our character. So just select the spring arm here, and then over in rotation we're going to change the Z rotation to -90. We can compile and save that, give it a quick test, see what we've got. Lovely. Camera's a little bit low, so we'll jump back out. It's also quite close. We'll select the spring arm, set the target arm length to, let's say, 900 for now. We can always change these as we go. And the socket offset here, if we choose the last box here, that's the Z axis. I'll maybe raise it by 200, which is 2 meters. We'll compile and save that. That's looking a little bit better for what we need. Obviously we can't move around yet, so we'll go about changing that now. Once we've got our character moving, rotating, jumping, we'll end the video there and then we'll pick it up in the next one. So we're going to need some inputs first to control our character. So back to our project settings, and we're going to go into input on the left hand side here, and we're going to set up an action and an axis mapping for this. So we'll make a new action mapping by pressing the plus button, hit the little drop down, we'll give it a name, jump, and we need to set some keys for it now. So you can just click this button here, which allows you to press any button to map it to. I'm going to choose spacebar, but you can set up multiple inputs if you like. So I can hit this plus button here, I'll add W, I'll add the up key on the arrows, I'll also add a controller button because I've got a controller plugged in, so I'll just press the controller button. So now jump can either be spacebar W up or the gamepad face button bottom, which would be A on the Xbox controller or X on the PlayStation controller, I think. We'll set up our axis mapping now. So we'll hit the plus button next to that, hit the little drop down, give it a name, move right, and then we'll bind it to some keys. Because this is an axis, it's got a scale, right? So it can go to whatever we like. In this case, it's going to be a maximum of 1 and a minimum of -1. So we don't need a move left, we just need a move right. So for this first key, I'm going to bind it to the D key, hit the little drop down. Second key, I'm going to bind it to A, and I'm going to set that scale on A to -1. Again, we can set up more keys, so I'll just add a couple more. This time the right key is going to go to a scale of 1, and the left key is going to go to a scale of -1, and then I can add the thumbstick if I like. So I'll just move the thumbstick on the x-axis, and it's added in the x-axis. You don't need a left and right for the thumbstick, because pushing it to the right takes it to 1, pushing it all the way to the left takes it to -1, so we don't need a left and right for that one. Alright, we're all set up there, so let's go back to our player character, into the event graph. Let's delete these starting events, we don't need them for now. Let's get jumping working first, so I'm just going to right click and search for jump, and I'm looking for the action event jump. That's the one that we just made. From pressed, I'll take the execution pin out and search for jump again, and we'll add the jump function in. And then from released, I'm going to search for stop jumping. Put that in. We can compile and save that and give it a quick test. Click on the screen. Let's try W, spacebar, up arrow, and there's the face button on the controller, so our character jumps nicely. Okay, let's make the character move left and right. So we'll right click, search for our move right, and we're looking for the axis event move right. There it is. We'll take the execution pin out of there and search for add movement, and we're looking for add movement input. If we take the I'll tell you what, I'll show you what happens. First of all, we need to set the world direction. So which direction do we want this input axis to move on? So we're going to take the X and type 1 into there. If we just leave the scale value at 1, press compile and save, our character will automatically move to the right. We can also jump. If we were to set that to -1, our character will automatically move to the left. If we take this axis value, which basically changes when we press D or A or the arrow keys or the thumbstick, that will then change the scale value for us. So if we take this, let me just take this axis value, plug that into the scale value, we can compile and save. The character won't automatically move, but when we press D, it sets the axis value to 1, so it changes the scale value to 1, and then A goes to the left. There's the arrow keys doing the same thing, and then the thumbstick as well. The thumbstick does allow you to move very, very slowly, which can be a bit of a problem with some animations, but we can fix that at some point. Right, I'll press escape to jump out. Let's get the character rotating now, because as you can see, it is just sliding backwards and forwards, which is why I put that arrow there. Okay, so to do this, we are going to check to see if our axis value is more or less than 0. So if it's more than 0, we're going to the right, which means we want to rotate our character to face the right. And if it's less than 0, we want to rotate our character to face to the left, because that's the direction that we're going in. So to do that, we'll take the execution pin out of the add movement input, and we're going to search for compare float. The compare float is going to allow us to compare input with a value that we choose. So in this case, we are going to compare the axis value of our move right. We'll plug that into the input. You can double click here just to put some reroute nodes in, or reroute, whatever you want to call them, just to keep things nice and neat. So we are now comparing whatever the axis value is with a value of 0. If it's more than 0, it'll execute here. If it's equal to 0, it'll execute there. If it's less than 0, it'll execute this way. So we just need more than or less than. So if it's more than 0, this execution. To do this, we need to right click and search for get player controller, because we need to talk to the player controller here, and then take the the return value out and search for set control rotation. We can right click and split this rotation so we can see its X, Y, and Z values. For moving right, we want to set the rotation to 0, 0, 0, so we don't need to do anything there. So let's duplicate this by selecting it and pressing Ctrl D, plug in the player controller reference, and because we're going to go left with this one, we need to set the new rotation on the Z only to 180 degrees, so it'll rotate it around to face the left. We'll plug in our more than into this rotation and our less than into this rotation. So we're basically saying compare the axis value with 0. If it's more than 0, rotate to this set of values here. And if it's less than 0, rotate to these values here. Again, I'm just going to pop in a couple of reroute nodes just to keep things nice and neat and readable. We'll compile and save that. We're going to be left with a problem. So we'll go to the right, that's fine. We go to the left, and we are actually rotating, but our camera is rotating with our character, so it's hard to see what's actually happening there. Obviously, we don't want the camera to do that. So let's select the spring arm, and if we come down to camera settings here, let's just turn off these inherit pitch, yaw, and roll. Strictly speaking, we only need yaw, but we might as well turn them all off here. And that means that the spring arm will not will not inherit the rotation of the player. So it's now kind of independent in its rotation. So if we press play now, our character rotates, but our spring arm does not. We're getting like a little bit of flicker there, and that's down to the motion blur that's in the project settings. That will interfere with our sprites later, so we might as well change that off, turn that off now. So if we go to project settings, you can just search for motion blur up here if you want, but if you want to know where it is, it's in rendering. And then we scroll on down until we find the default settings, and here's motion blur. We're going to turn that off. Later on we'll turn off anti-aliasing, but for now we'll just turn off motion blur. These things will interfere with the quality of your sprites. So yeah, motion blur turned off for the time being. Let's go back to the level. It was maybe hard to see on the screen, but we're not getting any flicker at all now, so it's nice and sharp. So I think the last thing we can have a look at before we end this video is the way that the player moves. So obviously we've got things like the height of the character's jump, the amount of gravity, it feels kind of floaty to me, and then we've got the maximum movement speed, and if you can see, like, the character does gradually accelerate and decelerate, so we can maybe have a look at some of those settings and change them. So I'm going to go into the player character, and we're going to select the character movement component for this. Over on the right hand side here, we're looking in the details tab. First of all, I've got gravity scale. I'm going to turn the gravity scale up on my character to 3. If I do that, the result is we can't jump as high anymore. So to counteract that, let's go to the character movement component again, scroll down into the jumping falling section. Here we've got jump Z velocity. I'm going to set that to 1200 centimeters per second, and let's check it out. Alright, we've got a decent jump now. The other thing we can have a look at is air control of the character. So at the moment I've got like a little bit of control of the character when it's in the air, but not very much. If I just find air control here, if you set this to 0, you'll have no control over your character in the air, and if you set this to 1, you will have full control. So now with it set to 1, I'm able to move around in the air, but because we've still got acceleration and deceleration, it's not that significant, but it does allow me to change direction. Let's have a look at acceleration and deceleration. So again, on the character movement component, I'm going to come up to the top here. Here we've got max acceleration. I'm just going to set that up to 99,999 just to make sure it's really high. And I'm going to come down to braking deceleration and do the same there. This is going to make my character get up to full speed instantly and stop instantly, and it does mean I've got a lot more control in the air now as well. And the last thing we can have a look at, we'll have a look at something else actually, but for now let's have a look at the max walk speed. So that is in walking. So if we find walking and then max walk speed, which is currently set to 600, let's try 1000, and the character is moving a lot quicker now. We can have a look at double jumping. That's actually in the player character self, the root component. If we scroll up to the top, we'll have a look at jump time as well, but let's do jump count. So I can set that very simply to 2, compile, save, press play. I've now got a double jump. Lovely. We've also got, like I said, jump hold time. So this basically allows you to set it up so the longer you hold jump, the higher your. Sorry, my headset just decided to turn itself off there. So yeah, the longer you hold this button, the higher your character will jump, just like Super Mario Brothers. So if I was to set this to 0.2, that means if I press the button just once, we get a little jump, and if I hold it, we get a bigger jump. Little jump, bigger jump. Let's increase that again just so you can really see the difference. Let's change it to 0.5. I'll put that jump count back down to 1. Little jump, big jump. Little jump, big jump. Right, cool. So you set up your player character. You can have a bit mess around with your movement component, and make sure you record everything in your blog. So I want to see things like your blueprints explaining what they do, and specifically I really need to see you setting up your inputs here. So I want to see a screenshot that shows you setting up your action mapping and your axis mapping, and then how that relates to the blueprint that you've made. And it would be super nice if you were to create a little bit of a screen capture of the results of that. And while you're at it, why not talk through some of your character movement settings, like your max acceleration, your gravity scale, your maximum walk speed, and then of course if you were to change anything like the jump max count, and then the max hold time as well. So make sure you get all that recorded on your blog, and then we'll come back for the next video. I'll see you then.